Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
And that was your warning. And now we can begin. Here's a little horror story for you. And it's one of ours, so you know it'll be slightly different. So, let's begin. On a night, just like most nights, there was a young Wahine growing up being her being, just like us, being our beings. She's a young mum, this young Wahine, with a young son, on her own, raising him, working as one does. And one night, just like any night, she rewards herself and gets a babysitter and goes out for a beer and a bite. And she ends up in a bar, just like most bars, having that beer and a bite. And a man, not like most men, buys her a drink and chats her up. And our little Wahine, for the first time in a long time, forgets all about the stresses of being a mum and living in the world as we do. And she gets a bit tipsy after a while. And this guy says to her that he knows another bar which is better for that beer and a bite. So she agrees, as she wants to stay in that moment carefree and happy. So she leaves the bar with this guy and she does something stupid. She decides to drive. This guy tells her where to go. So they end up in like nowhere, like a lot of nowheres, and this guy jumps out and says he'll just go check, and says he'll be back in a minute, and comes back in a minute and says come with. And she, being wasted, said okay. And our little Wahine walks with this guy, and as they're walking, she suddenly feels that 8th sense kick in, and she feels scared. So she turns to leave this guy in this nowhere. This guy grabs her arm and slams her into the ground. Then this guy pulls out a very big knife, holds it to her throat and says to her, scream and I'll kill you. And then he rapes her. And as he's doing that, he starts hurting her more and more. And it got too much for the little Wahine, so she started to scream. So he stopped. And for that moment, in that moment, she, still being wasted naked from the waist down, took off and tried to get away. But he caught her and he bashed her. And then he did it all over again. This guy that's not one of us. Then when he had finished, he told the little Wahine to get dressed and ordered her to come with him down a path. And she saw a rickety old shack, and he dragged her to the door. And when they entered, there was another one of these guys, and he ripped her too. Then both of these guys, them left, went outside, and our little Wahine got dressed and went outside beaten and bruised, and saw both of these ex-offenders chatting to each other. Then bad guy 1 told her to get in the car. She got in, and the bad guy 1 started driving towards the interstate, Highway 1, out of that place called Nowhere. And as they were driving, beaten and bruised, the last of her mana, the thought of her son, and that she, our little Wahine, our little mum, would never see her son again. So our little Wahine opened the door and rolled out onto that road and bolted as fast as she could, and made it. And justice turns up and finds the bad guy, this bad guy who was already a bad guy on supervision for being a bad guy. And the judge throws the book at him, that big book of justice. And bad guy 1 gets 43 years. What he did to our little Wahine, punishment and justice turned up. Late, but nonetheless turned up. So the little Wahine went on with her life, and bad guy 1, Arthur Williams, went on with his. Now, in our little story, we're going to time jump into the future called the present, 23 years from the time he committed his crime. And in our little horror story, we're about to see the effect. What changes in his life have come about from the time he did in that place called Nowhere 23 years ago. For that's what justice is, the changes that makes upon the offender, how it changes their lives, how his crime has affected and changed him for the better. To have people speak up on his behalf about his life and how everything has changed for that better, and that he has left all of that behind him and is ready to start a new life. So let's go listen in and see if Utu has been paid and justice has been done and our lives have been changed from the crime that he committed 23 years ago.
Arthur Williams, DOC number 332577, third class offender, for eligibility date 8/1/2021. Good time date 12, 18, 20, 33. Full term date 7, 4, 20, 41, a 43-year sentence. Attempted escape, forcible rape, death over 500. Does that sound correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
All right. How old are you, Mr. Arthur?
48.
And for the record, we have Mr. Randy Myers that will speak at the appropriate time. Mr. Randy Myers.
Excuse me?
And Mr. Ray Charles Arthur.
Yes,
Okay. Then we'll speak at the appropriate. How old are you?
48.
How long have you been incarcerated?
Approximately 23 years and a few months now.
23 years on a 44-year sentence. Tell me when your last disciplinary write-up was.
March 1st of 21.
Tell me about it.
I was intoxicated. I had smoked something that I wasn't supposed to do.
Mojo, or was it something?
Yes, yes, it was.
You've been in jail 23 years and you know that probably wasn't a good thing?
I know. I tried. I know.
Yeah, that's tough. That's going to be a problem for me. Listen, have you taken sex offender treatment?
Yes, sir, I am.
You taken all phases?
I've been in one phase at a few different facilities, and it's not that I hadn't taken all the phases. It's just that I've been getting kind of stopped because of either been moved from a facility and recently this COVID. So
Right.
I hadn't had able to actually finish the whole treatment. So.
Right, you haven't taken it. You've taken just phase 1, is basically what you're saying, correct?
Yes, sir.
First up, we have a warden that speaks on behalf of Arthur, the bad guy one, to say that his life is turned around.
Yes, sir. My name is Colonel Anthony Outlaw. Right now, this individual, Mr. Williams, actually works for me on the wall. He arrived here in 2016. He's a very, very hard worker, very respectful staff. And the incident that he had over a year ago with intoxication, and nothing matches in his record or even his street charges to even come close to what he had did. And he apologized for that for 2 or 3 months. So I know it hurt him, and he didn't really like what he actually did. He was mad at himself for it and stuff. It wasn't like he's just a constant user like some of them that I do have. But, prior to that, he was 3 years right up free. And he messed up, made a bad decision. But he's a very, very good worker and respectful staff.
All right, thank you so much for your comments.
Yes, sir.
Next up, we have his cousin that believes bad guy one has done enough.
Arthur James is my first cousin. He was my first brother. I'm the oldest child that my parents have, and he was like my big brother. He taught me so much. And going through life when you don't have that piece, that piece of the puzzle as far as just family, it's hard. And I miss my better half, but I know, he had to pay for his mistakes, and I feel like through this time it's finally getting to him, and he's understanding what it is. At the beginning, he didn't have a good support staff. He didn't have people around him that was telling him, or trying to help him to get better. And right now, our family is in such a much better spot. I know if you guys would see it in your heart to allow my cousin to come home, that the support staff and the love that will be around him and showed to him, he would be an exemplary citizen. I just feel that, I believe that. And I just want to thank you guys for allowing me the time to speak on my cousin's behalf.
All right, thank you.
So that's all from Arthur's side, to show the parole board that in this story that Arthur has changed his life and that crime is behind him, that Utu has been paid and that his life will only get better. And Arthur, our bad guy, feels the hope of sunlight on his skin, that it's true, he's put all of that badness behind him, that his crime and the punishment has changed his life for the better, that the days will only get brighter. But you see, what Arthur doesn't know about this story is that Mana has turned up, our little Wahine, that young mum with a son. You see, Arthur, like most offenders, never thinks about the victim, because they see it as if they can change for the better, then the victim's life can't get any worse. Because like DC sex offenders, the thought that if they can get over it and not do it again, then that should be enough, for he's changed his life for the better.
I'm opposing his early release. He has caused me to think of this most every day of my life since then. I carry around fear of trusting people, always looking over my shoulder, fear of driving in certain areas, now nightmares of the image in my head that won't go away. But I would never see my son. It was 4 days before his birthday. It's hard to get close to anyone that have any kind of relationship. It's hard to talk about it. Right after it happened, I laid on the floor for days in a fetal position and only ate to survive. I don't think I can ever get over this. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your comment.
It's a screwed up world when it comes to justice, when the strongest weapon that we have protecting us from the bad guys getting out is the same one that we and the whole justice system has been built to protect. It's a screwed up world, after all.
Here to vote, I'll vote first, Mr. Arthur. Listen, you're saying you're doing right and doing right. Two things you've had write-ups every year. You've had them every year, not just, you didn't fall back just last. You had 46 write-ups from 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. That's something you need to get under control. You do need to, for me to ever support you, you're going to have to complete the sex offender treatment. But you have victim opposition, law enforcement opposition, you need sex offender treatment, you have poor institutional records. So my vote is to deny you parole.
Mr. Williams, I've listened intently, and young lady, you're a victim. I just applaud you, the courage and determination it took to let your voice be heard today, and I heard you. And I believe Mr. Williams did too. I don't think he never heard it before. But as to you and my vote is to deny as well. But you've lost 386 days of good time, very poor supervision history, and some of the things already been stated. My vote is denied as well.
All right, Mr. Williams, I'm not going to rehash the problem because it was really terrible. And I think you just got a glimpse of what impact it's had on the victim in this case. And I hope that that has had an impact on you. So, I said before that you complete all phases of the sex offender program. Now, I understand that's not necessarily the fault that you're not being able to do that, but I think it's critical for you going forward to complete all phases of that, as well as victim awareness, so that you really can understand how devastating this is for the victim in this case. But I think you have some more work to do. So my vote today would be to deny.
Bring us to deny today. Your parole's been denied. Good luck to you.
Sex crimes. Sex crimes are the crimes which can identify a type of person that is capable of committing such a crime. It is the type of crime that it is expected that the victim won't recover from, because a part of them dies and the memory of that murder lives on forever. And that is why UTU is so severe, because just like homicide, the part of that being which is murdered can never be brought back to life.
And this is just into our newsroom. Police have arrested a sex offender wanted in California, here in Las Vegas. And wait until you check out this mugshot. See all those tattoos? Wasn't too hard to find him. This is Martin G. Suarez. He's a registered sex offender wanted for a parole violation. He was just taken into custody since he was 14 years old. He's been arrested more than 35 times in California.
It's arresting a convicted child predator less than a year after he was paroled.
Robert Sohn was charged last Tuesday by the Livingston County prosecutor with second-degree criminal sexual conduct of a child under 13, the same crime that sent him to prison for 5 years.
Robert Sohn had not registered as a sex offender, as was part of his parole. In fact, he was befriending neighbors, including children, and none of them had any idea who he was.
Have learned a convicted sex offender is on the run, accused of another sexual assault of a minor while on parole. Well, that's right. 36-year-old Christopher Law is a fugitive from justice, facing serious new charges here in Utah. Trying to figure out how and why he had unsupervised access to a minor as a convicted child sex offender. Christopher Law's entry on Utah's sex offender registry shows he is non-compliant. Location unknown. Law pleaded guilty to aggravated sexual abuse of a child in 2010. He served 10 years of a 6 to life sentence before Utah's Board of Pardons and Parole granted him release in 2020. Here's what he told the board before his release.
I'm willing to do whatever it takes to reintroduce myself into society and prove that I can be a productive member.
Law is now charged with raping a minor last month while still on parole. According to court documents, when confronted by a witness on June 24th, Law said he, quote, couldn't help himself.
Convicted rapist Benjamin Laguerre is back in custody less than a month after he was paroled. The state parole board says that Laguerre violated the conditions of his release, even after being warned. He was sentenced to life for the 1984 rape and robbery of a neighbor.
This is 31-year-old Daniel Langdon. This, too, is Daniel Langdon, as is this. Pictures Toronto police say he altered to appear younger on social media. After a lengthy and ongoing investigation, police have charged Langdon with 96 sexual offenses involving multiple underage victims since April 2021.
One alleged incident involved a 7-year-old victim who was sexually assaulted at a Toronto park.
Toronto police had previously warned the public about Langdon in 2016 when he was arrested and eventually convicted of charges related to child pornography. According to court records accessed by Global News, he was sentenced to 2 years less a day in jail and put on the National Sex Offender Registry for life. But the registry, which can only be accessed by police, is just a list. And once offenders are released from jail, they're often not tracked.
That's really the problem here, is we don't know how to address this type of behavior. You never stop having a sexual interest in children. It needs to be managed properly.
Today when he appeared in court, ladies, he was actually sentenced to 4 years in prison for that probation violation back in 2022. Prosecutors say Jared Wright, born and raised in Akron, Ohio, has a long history of inappropriate relationship with teens that dates back to him being 16 years old. Back in 2017, Wright ran away with a younger girl while he was also involved with another girl who was just 14, and her family took out a restraining order against him. And 2 years later, he moved to Florida, where he allegedly met a 15-year-old girl on social media. After allegedly going to her house, her parents also filed a restraining order. Then in 2021, when Wright was 20, he was arrested by police in the Akron area after being accused of trying to have sex with an underage cousin while hiding in a relative's home. Days after his arrest there, Wright was released, got on a Greyhound bus, and came to Cincinnati. And that's when prosecutors say he met up with a then 15-year-old girl who he also met on social media. For 3 weeks, he lived with the teen in her bedroom basement of her family's College Hill home without her family knowing. Prosecutors say during that time, contact occurred. Wright was arrested while hiding under the victim's bed. Initially, he was charged with rape, but pleaded guilty to 3 counts of gross sexual imposition and illegal use of minor and nudity-oriented material. As part of his guilty plea, he was ordered to serve 3 years of probation while receiving treatment at the Talbot House Turtle Creek Center. But in October, the judge says he left the facility without her approval. Wright's lawyer, James Moore, explained to the judge his client's reasoning for leaving the program. Judge Jennifer Branch sentenced Wright to 4 years in prison with 549 days served.
Do you think that was fair?
I'll have to reserve my comments on that point.
Found a troubling number of registered offenders not complying with state requirements.
Today, now federal and state law enforcement officers set a goal to check in with 1,000 offenders. They say that 20% were not in compliance with the conditions that are required of people on the sex offender registry.
Okay. You charged with forced rape. Just give me a brief rundown of what went on in this crime.
Well, I was going with a white girl. She was my girlfriend. And I had another girlfriend that was a white girl. And me and her was fooling around. She got upset because I didn't rushed ejaculation on her and tried to get back to my girl. And she got mad and grabbed my penis and put her fingernails in it and snatched hard. You know what I'm saying? She wouldn't want to let go. And I slapped her. And she said, what am I gonna tell my mom, my stepfather? I told her, I said, you can tell them what you want. You know what I'm saying? You did that, not me. You know what I'm saying? But she left and they came to the house and picked me up for it.
Okay. Looking at the arrest report, the story is very much different from what you're trying to tell me. It said you jumped in a car, took her to a building, you kicked her, you tried to halfway break her neck, and then a few days later, you and a friend tried to sell her graduation ring, and you were identified as the person trying to sell her ring with her name on it. Why did y'all stories differ so much?
You know, in my country, Aotearoa, back in the day, what they used to do to things like this, if they ever a wahine, is that they used to cut off the dick and the balls and shove it into the mouth of the rapist. And if they lived, then the gods smiled upon them. And if they died, well, then the gods smiled upon them. And for me, sometimes I wish we could go back to the days of old.
She admitted that she consented to the sex in the trial. And the lawyer came in and said they're gonna offer you 15 years. And I said, I said for the part I did taking the ordeal, I said I accept full responsibility for my actions. You know, and she stand up again and said that she consented to the sex like that. And I said, I can't do nothing but what y'all asked. You know, then they said, well, we trying to offer you 30 years. Would you take the 30 years? My mom and them told me not to take the 30 years because the girl consented to the sex.
Mr. Howard, I've got a couple of questions. I don't want to prevail heavily on facts, but I do want to ask you a couple of questions about that.
Yes, sir.
You indicate that you were in the middle of a trial. Is that right, when you took your plea?
Yes, sir. I was in the middle of the trial.
You keep saying that the victim said this was consensual sex. The victim actually testified in a trial and told the judge and a jury that this was consensual?
Yes, sir. It's all on the record. I got the paperwork too. She's consented to the sex. She stated to the record, she stated for everybody in there that she consented to the sex.
Well, did you know this lady before that particular day?
Yes, sir. She had been to the house all the time, coming to my mom's house too.
She took the stand and she said, I know this man. I've been knowing this man all this time, and my sex was consensual, and you and your lawyer pled guilty? It doesn't make much sense to me.
The lawyer told me to plead guilty.
You know, part of what we are here today, Mr. Howard, we don't really litigate the old facts, but if someone is being dishonest and not telling the truth, that goes a long way with me. I can't speak for the rest of the board. So I'm having trouble believing what you're telling me now. So is that your story? Is that what you're sticking to? You say this lady actually took the stand and said this sex was consensual, and I've known this man for a long time?
Yes, sir.
It's crazy, eh? Isn't it just crazy how this piece of filth actually believes that his strategy of lying so plainly about something so horrific that it was just completely a mistake, and that it was his lawyer that convinced him and his mum not to take the deal and then to plead guilty halfway through a trial. That, ladies and gentlemen, and all those in between, that is why DCs are DC.
She said to
In the courtroom.
In the courtroom, they asked her, did she consent to the sex? And she said, yes, she consented to the sex.
Is that because you had a knife on her or something like that?
I didn't have no gun, I didn't have no knife.
You didn't hurt her in any way?
I slapped her.
So, it makes you think. What makes you think? What makes you think is, so why is it that Measy chose this DC, this fucking thing? Why does this DC stand out further than the rest? And the thing is, it's not because of just this DC. It's really because, you see, the victim, the survivor, the woman, the Wahine, Miss Mortons, is here, and it is because of this Wahine, the woman, the survivor, the victim, Miss Mortons, burns this fucking creature back into its cell. And in this universe, it is not just a most splendid, but a most powerful thing.
Ms. Martin, I know it's been difficult for you to hear what you've heard. If you'll unmute your microphone and tell us what you'd like us to hear.
Well, first of all, I want to say that everything coming out of his mouth is lies. He is delusional. I've never, ever met him. I've never been to his house. And as a matter of fact, I've never in my life had any relations with any African-American man. I did not know him.
So now that we know the Wahine is here, we get to find out two things. The first is what actually happened that night, and the reason. The reason of what? Well, that would be the second thing. The reason why this fucking thing and all those things like it should never be granted parole.
I was hanging out with a girlfriend of mine and her boyfriend, and because I was the third wheel, I volunteered to go pick up cigarettes and ice cream. He jumped in my car, told me he had a gun, and made me drive, and made me get out of my car where he raped me. And then he beat me half to death, and I know he was trying to kill me. He tried several times to break my neck. He got off my back and started kicking me in the face. And if I hadn't held my breath and played dead long enough to get the adrenaline to get up, I would be dead.
So that's exactly what he did. That is exactly what she survived. That is the reason why he's in prison. And the very reason why he should never get fucking paroled. When it comes to punishment and justice with that scale, you also have to add on top of that all of the fucking trauma that Miss Martins has gone through. And then you have to add on top of that all of the trauma her Whanau, her extended Whanau, and all of her friends did too. And that's a good place to look at balancing the scales of punishment well before it gets to the parole.
I was 19 when that happened. I am about to be 45 this year, and I still have nightmares. I still have problems dealing with this. It will never go away. It changed me forever. He is a filthy, nasty liar. I never met him.
It is the worst thing that can affect emotion, and that word is called a trauma. And it's acts or behavior, something which has happened, taken place, which has such a dramatic effect on the human. And when it comes to us humans, what effect assault of any kind has upon a victim, we, ones that have not been sexually assaulted, it's hard for us to understand the brutality of that trauma. And that's why, with the advice Miss Morton says next to the parole board in making their decision upon paroling this sex offender, should be used with all sex offenders, and not just because it makes sense, but because it makes common sense.
And I don't think he should be allowed to be out. I know he's only got like 6 more years, but that 6 more years, he becomes older. And the older he is when he gets out of prison, the less likely he is to rape another person or try to kill or rob another person. I hope he's in jail long enough to become impotent and crippled and old and feeble. I hope he rots when he gets out. He is not safe for society, especially since he won't own his actions. He has developed his own story in his mind. He has never taken responsibility for what he did. He has never expressed remorse. He is a monster.
So now that our Wahine has slammed those cell doors shut, what possibly could this DC have to say?
Mr. Howard, is there anything else you'd like to say to the board before we vote? Mr. Howard, if you're going to speak, you need to speak to us. Do not speak to the victim at all.
All I can say is that I've been rehabilitated.
Genius.
I'm not causing any more trouble. And I want to be out with my mom because she died and I need to get out there. But if the good Lord deems it's sufficient, then let his will be done.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Appreciate your comments. Ben, ready to vote?
Yes, sir. Okay, Mr. Howard, first off, I think in my mind, you've been totally dishonest today. You have a terrible supervision record. You have a terrible prison record. All law enforcement are strongly opposed, as well as the victim. I would like to thank for having the courage to speak to us this morning. You cleared up a lot of things for us, and I vote to deny.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson.
Mr. Howard, you're not ready. You're not ready. You've been completely dishonest with this board today. I don't know if you knew the victim was going to be here today to dispute things that you were saying. You have a poor supervision history before you came to prison. You've had a poor disciplinary record in prison. You refused a lot of programs. You've only completed phase 1 of offender treatment. There's strong victim and law enforcement opposition, and today my vote is to deny your early release.
Mr. Howard, first off, I'd like to thank Ms. Martin for the courage to be here today and to testify. Mr. Howard, I agree with everything my colleagues have said. I think you've been very dishonest with us. I don't know exactly what problems you may have, or you may have in fact convinced yourself what you believe is true. But that is not what happened. And I think that, for all of the reasons said previously, my vote is likewise to deny. So good luck to you.
You know, the universe that we live in, to me, sometimes just seems kind of backwards. And that when we look at these worthless things getting out of prison that are coming up for parole after hurting Wahine and kids that went up for that parole, that the person, the entity, the being that protects us from them the most is the one being that we all fail to protect. And that being, predominantly, is the Wahine, the power of the Wahine. Never underestimate how strong that power can be. And you should check that power out over at Merchandise, over at the new site. Yes, the new site. Come take a look, join the team, or just be your being. Either or. See you there. So here is a couple of links for you. Yeah, come check out the site. It'd be cool, and it is Christmas. And if not, then check out the episode on the screen right now. Okay, stay safe. Ka kite.